of this entire planet we live in, only 1% of the water that's available is for us, for drinking water.
Our two most important natural resources are our air and our water. Try living very long without either one of them.
I look at water as a God-given gift to us and something that we need to protect for our later generations.
We right now are facing critical environmental issues. It takes all of us pulling together to turn us around.
Something about bringing together a community effort and getting to know your neighbors and getting educated about the community.
Community involvement, public involvement will provide the support and encouragement that local governments need to protect our water resources.
The message is we're headed for major legislation to deal with our watersheds and our watershed resources. And the only way we'll get to the right decisions will be through an involved and enlightened public.
Throughout the state of Georgia, communities are redefining themselves with an idea that is both old and quite new: the watershed. A watershed is defined by a natural set of boundaries, the creeks, streams, and rivers that flow through our neighborhoods. These timeless pathways cross over political districts, connecting people to the land and to each other.
When I started looking at the watershed, I realized that my neighborhood was a lot bigger than what I had originally envisioned it to be.
Oh, it's really interesting to think about my neighborhood as a watershed. I never thought about these boundaries. And I find that the other people that I talk to are fascinated to talk about it. Those of us who've lived here for many years, nobody really knows where these creeks go unless they've studied it. And it's very hard to visualize because, of course, the roads don't go where the creeks are. The creeks are all behind houses and behind businesses.
It is these smaller bodies of water that feed our larger rivers and lakes, creating a remarkable network of waterways that nourish both land and people. In 1972, Congress passed the Clean Water Act in an effort to help preserve these irreplaceable natural resources. Since then, much has been done to regulate and clean up what is commonly called point source pollution, such as industrial waste, toxic spills, and leaking landfills. But still, problems persist in the form of non-point source pollution. The Environmental Protection Agency has reported that non-point source pollution is the leading remaining cause of water quality problems. These include excess fertilizers, herbicides, and pesticides from lawns, gardens, and farms. Oil, grease, and toxic chemicals used by millions of people every day. Sediment runoff from construction sites and eroding stream banks. Waste products from livestock, pets, and faulty sewage and septic systems. And of course, the littering and dumping of trash and other discarded items. These various forms of pollution are swept into our waterways by rainfall and other forms of runoff. They have an adverse effect on the water quality, wildlife, and natural beauty of these areas. The increased urbanization of our communities and thriving development create great stresses on our natural systems.
What has happened is, over the years, that watershed has evolved into a system that yields water in a certain manner. And we've gone in and tapped those sources of water, and now the growth that has increased the demand that we've tapped into is also having an impact on the system's ability to yield the water. The more impervious surfaces, the more roofs, the more highways, the more land use practices that change and take away natural forest and natural woodlands and natural vegetation and replace it with something artificial, decreases the yield of the system to begin with. You're increasing the demand, and you're also reducing the system's ability to yield water.
I think the biggest problem is unplanned growth. We need to start looking at our ecosystems as a whole rather than address a problem when it becomes a problem. We need to keep buffers around our stream systems. We need to protect our life support systems.
These factors and others require individuals to be more watchful over the health and sustainability of their watersheds. The natural boundaries defined by these creeks and streams are creating new alliances, connecting people across neighborhoods with a common interest in taking responsibility for the water resources in their larger communities.
A watershed alliance is a wonderful way of bringing together people who have all those interests, and hopefully a community group who really cares would lead the effort to improve and protect the waterways.
To build a successful watershed alliance, you have to have some structure, and you've got to have some people that are going to step forward and be leaders. And frequently people are just kind of thrust into the limelight.
Most watershed alliances begin simply, with a few concerned citizens coming together around a problem in their immediate neighborhoods or even their own backyards.
People have found that their backyards are beginning to wash away.
We're real concerned about stream buffer, like riparian buffers that are removed.
Right now I'm very concerned about a series of sewer breaks that we've had in our creek.
What we found in northwest Atlanta is that there are a number of tires that are illegally dumped in communities.
The most common problems people experience are flooding, stream bank erosion, muddy streams, sewage spills, littering and dumping, loss of trees and plant life, and disappearing wildlife. These problems often serve as a catalyst for action. Small groups come together for meetings to discuss the issues, or concerns can be voiced at larger gatherings, such as neighborhood association meetings. These initial steps in building a watershed alliance are true grassroots efforts, reaching out to friends and neighbors for support. The right kind of leadership is important to the process.
I think that a leader really needs to have a genuine concern for watershed protection, and they want to empower others. It's not so much that they need to just take the ball and run with it, but they need to empower others to do what they can in their community.
The Little River Valley Association's main goal, I would say, would be to educate others about the need to preserve and protect water quality. And of course, we're educating ourselves as we go by attending a lot of seminars and workshops.
This is also a time of beginning a self-education process. There are numerous resources available to individuals and fledgling watershed groups, from local government to the World Wide Web. Many watershed groups begin their efforts through the Georgia Adopt a Stream program.
In the basic workshop, the Getting Started workshop, they learn what a watershed is. They learn about non-point source pollution, and they learn how to delineate a watershed. And then the more advanced workshops are the biological and chemical. And in the biological, they learn what macroinvertebrates are, and when they go out and dig around the stream and catch these macroinvertebrates, they study them, identify them, and they can figure out basically what the quality of their stream is.
In addition to Adopt a Stream, a variety of nonprofit groups, environmental learning centers, and technical assistance organizations are available to help you get started with building a watershed alliance.
We as an organization have information and expertise and experience that we can share with the community, but they know the watershed because they live there. So they educate us and we educate them, and it's a back and forth process. And that's the way it has to happen. That flow of information has to go in both directions.
But watershed education is not limited to websites, workshops, and meetings. Some of the best lessons come from nature itself.
In this Watershed Alliance, what's been really nourishing is getting out in the creek, learning more about it, walking it, seeing the different parts of it.
I think that the primary thing would be to know the land, know the area within your watershed. And of course it's easy enough from maps to determine the physical limits within which that water flows. But to really know it, to walk it, drive it, become familiar with it.
As people begin to be involved in watershed alliances and start looking at their own neighborhood, it is very important for them to reach out to other groups. It is real important for them to be extremely inclusive, and every one of those people brings something different to the table. And when that happens, it makes everybody's job a little bit easier.
We started with the meeting of this core group of people who liked each other and began to imagine a watershed alliance, and then we decided to have a neighborhood meeting. And I think one of the things we really did right was to pick a very well-known restaurant and hold our meeting on a Saturday morning when the restaurant was normally closed. This was just a very on-the-street, comfortable place, lots of other shops around it. You could imagine them coming for that and then going on and doing some other errands. So we felt like we started on day one with a partnership with a business and a very concerned group of people there, and that was good for our morale.
Once a core group has been established, these kinds of outreach efforts can begin. They typically include public meetings, creek cleanups, and tours of the watershed aimed at expanding the alliance to build a strong, diverse, and balanced organization.
When you come to an organization like the South River Watershed Alliance, you realize that there are people from diverse backgrounds, ethnic and otherwise, that have things in common with you that you may never have thought.
Watershed alliances are particularly good also because they are so open to all ages, all types of people. There's not a barrier between black and white, men and women, young and old. There's a real common interest in what the watershed issues are.
It's important to have a good working knowledge of the stakeholders in your watershed. A list of neighborhood associations, faith-based organizations, schools, and businesses is most helpful.
Our Watershed Alliance allows you to develop great partnerships with local governments and build upon the various strengths of those institutions within your community. You can develop relationships with local schools, you can develop relationships with different corporations that are providing a service, and they care about what's going on in the community that they serve. I just think it develops a mechanism for building up partnerships, leveraging resources, finding out what's going on, sharing it with citizens within your community.
Education is perhaps the single most important element to building a watershed alliance. An informed and active community is a strong community. Working with schools and various youth groups is a great way to share knowledge and energize your alliance while building for the future.
We had success with the children through the Scout program, both Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts.
We've tried to use a lot of hands-on activities in working with the children. They have taken their training, and the girls are just so enthusiastic now because they get down there in the creek and they know what to look for as far as the mackerel and vertebrates.
Oh, we got a big old crayfish.
Every time I walk onto these school campuses, if I see kids in the hallway, they want to know, when are we going to the creek? When are we going to the creek? So they love to get outside, they love the water, and they're learning about pollution issues. They're learning about how they impact Proctor Creek and how they are affected by Proctor Creek. They get excited about taking that information home to their parents.
There are many reasons to build a watershed alliance: environmental protection, community partnerships, and improved quality of life. But there's another incentive to keep in mind.
The first reason I would say to build a watershed alliance is because it's fun. I mean, I truly do think it's fun.
can get the people out to the creeks, out to the rivers, and they can see the wonderful resource that we have here, then they develop an appreciation for it. And they want to know, well, what's happening with it? They see the problems, they see the trash, they start testing the water, they realize there are things there that shouldn't be there. And then they want to do something about it. And that not only involves finding out what the problems are, but working on the solutions. And when you form an alliance, when more people come together, then they start to influence regulations, they start to influence government decisions, and then you really start to see changes.
These watershed groups play not only a tremendous education role, because each one of those people that's in that watershed group is going to touch a lot of different people, but maybe even more importantly than that is that the more people that are educated and have some idea of what's going on in these watershed issues and the analysis of those things, I think that they make better informed decisions as far as electing people and looking at laws that are going to be passed.
Well, I think the key is just to know that you really can have an incredible influence on your legislators. A great example is in actually drafting legislation. I'd say 90% of the bills that I introduce did not come from me personally, but they were given to me by a constituent who had an idea. There's no way that legislators can be experts in every field, and we do rely tremendously on our constituents.
When the constituents let their local leaders know that water source protection is an important issue and one that needs to be addressed, I think you'll find resources moving toward that. I mean, politicians want to believe that they're doing what their constituents feel is important to them, but we need to let them know that this is one issue that we really need to address.
Watershed Alliance can provide a platform for action. It helps people overcome some of the barriers to acting. I think many of us have ideas that we would like to do something about and we don't act. And the Watershed Alliance can sometimes be very effective in just getting us over the hump, providing us a little sheet of paper with the proper phone numbers to call, providing us with an insignia or a hat or an identity which gives us legitimacy to stand up in a zoning board meeting and say, I represent the watershed and what about XYZ?
If there's something that we're doing in the city, it might be impacting one of these watersheds, I have a group I can go to. And I know that they have many, many stakeholders that are a part of that group that I can just educate them or get their feedback on a project that might be in their watershed without having to go door to door and try to figure out how to bring people together. In addition, the most important thing is I have an educated group.
You can take it from the aesthetics to the environmental to the economic. It's all there. Watersheds and watershed protection are going to be on the cutting edge of future policy and decision making. And it's going to take an enlightened public and a committed public to see that the right kind of decisions and balances are reached.
Most watershed alliances initially form as a result of a local crisis or singular political issue. In time, they often expand their efforts to establish an ongoing presence in the community. As with any organization, creating structure, defining a mission statement, and setting goals are critical to the process of sustaining this larger effort.
Community leadership is very important. It's the only way that the effort is going to be sustainable, because National Wildlife Federation or any other organization, it's not going to be able to sustain an effort that needs to be community-based.
The main thing is to get enough core people and involved that I think that kind of creates a synergy that keeps it going. The problem, I think, arises is when you have one or two people who lead the effort, and then if they decide we're tired of it or they move away or something, the effort falls.
One of the things that I see that happens is they get burned out. So what can they do to avoid being burned out is to try and train other people, bring people in and kind of be a mentor so that when you get tired, there's someone that can come up behind you.
An alliance is just like any other organization. We all have to play different roles, and we all have various talents and experiences that we can bring to it. Someone may be very good at writing the bylaws and the partnership and developing the basic structure of the organization. Others may be a hands-on person, good at organizing projects within their community. And still others may be good at identifying resources, writing grants, and developing partnerships with corporations that could help fund your alliance. And others may just be good at going out and inspiring people and talking to groups and getting them excited about being involved. And then we also need those who can establish the relationship with local governments, looking at zoning ordinances and land disturbance ordinances, and working with politicians to change the way we do business in order to protect our resources.
One of the most important things to remember when you're building a watershed alliance is that each one is unique. Now there's guidelines and there's books and there's different resources, but you have to remember to adapt that and be flexible.
One of the biggest problems in Watershed Alliance is unrealistic expectations, where they either think they're going to get a lot accomplished in a short period of time and they don't realize how difficult it is to get information and to get people educated and up to speed and develop a plan of action. I think that some of the most successful ones have actually developed, it's almost like a business where you develop a business plan and you say, here are our goals, here's what we hope to accomplish by this year, and then they move forward in that way with all the stakeholders involved. And there have been many watershed alliances in the United States that have gone on for years and years and years and have become only stronger over time.
Ultimately, these kinds of groups, I think, are going to be what turn us around. I mean, we right now are facing critical environmental issues.
We change our world a little bit every day just where we live, and it's that fact that we carelessly, thoughtlessly change the land that we find results in real damage to ourselves. I think that we simply need to know more and be a little less presumptuous.
These wonderful, natural, God-given systems are lifelines of biologic diversity, and they are lifelines for endangered species. They're the corridors for our wildlife. They're some of the last great green space that we have in natural undeveloped space, and that's really what's hanging in the balance now.
We can definitely make a lot of improvement in the conditions of our streams and creeks, but it's going to take money, it's going to take support, it's going to take the enthusiasm that our citizens can bring to it, and it's going to take political will.
I think that people basically want to make a contribution to this world, and to do so in your own neighborhood, to help preserve something that really you and I have been given stewardship over. And in that process, you will get to know other people in ways that you never imagined. And you'll start to understand that the human spirit is much bigger than you and I ever conceived of it being.